Hello, everyone. This is Trey Jadlow, and I'm here together with my new friend. What is your name? It's Bray, I know.
Bray, yeah, Greg Brahe.
Greg Brahe. Greg Brahe. I'm sorry.
That's all
I
right. I've
completely.
been there too, where it's like I've literally just used it a minute ago, and
Well, that's funny. Well,
wow.
we didn't spend much time talking before. I kind of like to keep these things more spontaneous. I think it makes it a little more interesting. And Greg, I know you from, I mean, you're familiar to me, but and we may have interacted in the past, but certainly not in the last several months. I don't know. But anyway, I think I'd seen you somewhere. Maybe it was on Sean Boatman's.
Yeah, I used to be pretty active in sort of different circles, I guess, online. But my wife and I we just invited another little addition to our family. So last June, and it's
Oh,
been much busier here. So
yeah. Well,
I don't get to do this as
congratulations.
much as I used to. Thank you.
So how many kids do you have?
Two now. Got a boy and a girl, Casey and Winry. And Winry will be one in June. Casey's about 4.5.
Wow, that's great. Well, congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
I have six children, and it's an absolute delight having kids. It's really hard, especially when you're younger, but as they grow into being your friends, and it's
What kind of
actually
age range do you look at with that? Are they all like, do you still have any in diapers or?
no. It's actually my oldest is 25, and my youngest is 12. So I've got three boys and three girls. So no more little ones. Like I said, there was a time when I wondered, and sadly, my wife has divorced me last year.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry.
oh, thanks. But our kid, there was a time when we were like up to our eyeballs in diapers, and thought, will this ever end? Really? I mean, and it's exasperating somewhat. But then, as they get older, and as they become adults, it's like the realization of the benefit of kids just really hits you. And I think, that's why you always have grandpa and grandma saying, I want more kids, because they've been through the whole cycle. They know the end result. And so they can see that, and they can encourage their kids to have kids. But anyway, congratulations. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. I'm glad that you've got a family and stuff, and blessings to you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Okay, so I would like to know a little bit about you. Um, you apparently, you've got a little bit of a. I mean, you're pretty good at this stuff. You've been doing this. Did you had a podcast or something? Because you told me you had a
I've
podcast, and
done
I
a
saw one.
few, yeah. I used to, well, I have a page on Facebook, Inspiring Doubt. The website is www.inspiringdoubt.com. That'll redirect you right there. And I got involved with that several years back with a friend. It was focused more on sort of politics and at that point, but now we've moved more in the direction of promoting skepticism and sort of a scientific approach to the world. I'm sorry, it's been a while since I've done live broadcasting. I'm not as articulate as I used to be, but
Mhm.
then through that and through a few other things, I got involved with the New Covenant group, which I know some people in your circles have been associated with as well, or not associated with, but have been on the shows and things. So I broadcasted on a show with the unconventional pastor, Bob Graves. We did for almost 2 years, I think. We did a weekly show called Inspiring Honesty. That was a fun show. Did several others too, weekly other hangouts. I mean, I was sometimes doing 5, 6, 7 hours broadcasting a week.
Wow.
And then, life happened and sort of had to step back from that, tried to get back into it for a while, and did my own show, Inspiring Doubt, that it was more of an interview-based show, sort of one-on-one. And that was, I think I did 13 or 14 episodes of that, and then kind of had to hang my hat for a while. It just became too much with the babies. So
Yeah.
then since then, I've only broadcast a couple times. So I'm happy to be back in the scene here. I'm going to do my best to not sit here and say the whole time, or misspeak like I've got my mouth like I just got out of the dentist. But it happens.
Sure. No, that's great. Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, so can you give me just a little bit of background about your background upbringing? Do you have any religious background at all?
Sure. So I was raised by my mom is best described sort of as apatheistic. She just doesn't care about it. My dad kind of waxes and wanes. He took us to a pretty liberal Christian denomination church. It was the First Congregational United Church of Christ, which is not anything like the Southern UCC churches, but it was. I still wasn't that actively involved. I went through religion classes still like once a week for 3 years, I think, and chose not to be confirmed. Didn't really do much else until college. Then I went through RCIA, the classes to become Catholic, because the woman who I'm still married to, my high school sweetheart, she was born and raised Catholic. So figured if I was looking for something, I might as well not start somewhere that it's going to cause relationships. And basically that started me on a long road of studying different religions, different denominations, and doing a lot of self-reflection on philosophy and theology, and settling on the conclusion that I'm not convinced that any gods exist. I am an atheist. As a matter of fact, I am pretty well convinced that there are no gods, things that would fit into any sort of classical theological definitions of gods that are sort of, to in some extent, anthropomorphic, have a will, a consciousness of any sort like that. So, of course, anytime I say I'm convinced that there are no gods, that opens the door to people saying, well, that's an irrational position, because I could define God in 100 million different ways, and one of them could be, my left shoe, and we know that my left shoe is here, so therefore God is here. It's for any practical intents and purposes, I not only am not a believer in God, I believe that there is not any gods, and that those who do believe in gods are in fact not justified in that conclusion, that they are most likely wrong. It's sort of a statistical position that I take. It's not an absolute, but that's where I hang my hat.
Okay, well, good. That's great. That gives me an idea of where you're at. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Before we begin, you made a statement that I was curious about. You said that you were something about all about inspiring skepticism. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, skepticism, when my page is Inspiring Doubt, the approach is really what I'm pushing here. It's about a methodologic, or sorry, it's about promoting a methodology for coming to beliefs and to examining the beliefs that we hold. So I talk a lot about things like conspiracy theorism, belief in things like aliens, UFOs, the Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, anti-vaccine, climate change denial, GMO foods, just generally speaking, people that are coming to their own conclusions about things that they're entirely unqualified to come up with these conclusions about. They simply don't have the knowledge base necessary to really even understand the topic, that they're rejecting the consensus opinion of the experts in the field. And it also then leaches into a fair amount of philosophy and sort of the philosophy of science, the philosophy related to epistemology.
Okay, so you're really not interested in inspiring skepticism, but you're inspiring skepticism for the goal of certainty. Would that be accurate?
No, it's actually the reason that I settled on the name Inspiring Doubt is because I am not looking for certainty. As a matter of fact, I think certainty is sort of a dangerous thing. I spend a fair amount of time reflecting upon the things that I believe, and constantly wondering, well, am I right about this? Because once I settle into a position and say, I am absolutely correct about this, and I am certain, and there is no way that I could be convinced that I'm wrong, well, then I've basically just taken a dogmatic approach that I'm going to now reject any evidence that might contradict my opinion. I think that's a very important part to the approach, is recognizing that we are fallible and that we may have not known all of the relevant information at the time. or that new information might be discovered, or even just that we had made errors in our reasoning to come to the conclusions that we were at.
Okay, well, you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we can have absolute certainty, because certainty is something that only omniscience has. Contingent existence must necessarily admit that they can't have complete certainty. But what I'm saying by certainty, and you seem to allude this in what you were saying, that you are searching for a degree of certainty that you don't have before, and you're changing your paradigm constantly in order to meet that goal of salvation. In other words, your goal is not skepticism, your goal is answers, right?
Right. Skepticism is not an end, it's a means to an end. It's a methodology.
That's right. So
the
when you say
goal
you're
is, yes, to
inspiring
have the most
skepticism,
accurate beliefs that I can.
right? So you're not looking to doubt as much as you're looking to get answers, right?
Well, yes and no. The doubt is, of course, not the goal, but I think that unfortunately humans are very prone to settling into positions, to not doubting themselves or doubting the things that they've been told. They trust authority for authority's sake, and in many cases simply fail to sort of do the due diligence of doubting the conclusions that they've come to on a regular basis. And that's really, I think, the important thing that I try to focus on is the method. That yes, it's great to have this increased confidence, but confidence can very easily be attained in an unjustified manner. I know, and I regularly deal with people who are incredibly confident that the president of the United States is actually a reptilian lizard.
Right. And so what I'm wanting to get from you, though, is, will you admit then that your goal is not skepticism, but rather, in a sense, not the same sense as me, but in a sense, you are seeking for salvation. You're seeking to save the phenomena of existence, as Plato would say.
Seeking, you said seeking
save the phenomena of existence. In other words, to seek salvation, seek to encourage existence, to encourage and prolong and save the phenomena, the phenomena of existence. This is what Plato was all about. In fact, all the philosophy has been that. It goes through cycles. It goes through, you come up with a paradigm, and then you come into skepticism, and then you have disintegration, and then you come up with a new paradigm, and you see another unity, and then it continually is going that, because we're continually moving along kind of in a Hegelian sense, where we are seeking salvation. I mean, every single one of us. Now, you and I are exactly the same, I would assert, in that we are seeking salvation. It's just like, I feel like I have the answers to eternal life, and you have the answers to a longer temporal life. Would that be accurate to say?
Trey, are you there?
Yeah, can you not hear me?
I couldn't for a moment there. Sorry, everything sort of froze up. So you say, last I heard was that let's see, Plato and sort of all of philosophy has been, and then it cut out.
Okay, so all of philosophy has been basically an earnest desire. In fact, this is what all human beings are moving toward, is for salvation. Try to see how we can make unity out of diversity. This is the greatest question of Western philosophy. How do we make coherence out of chaos? How do we take all of these disparate parts, and how can we unify them into a whole? And what we'll do is we'll come up with a paradigm that makes sense out of reality. It started with Heraclitus and Parmenides in the Western tradition, and Heraclitus said everything is changing. Parmenides says no, everything can't be changing, and they could not find a synthesis between those two, and then they fell into skepticism. And Socrates shows up on the scene and helps to bring unity out of those diverse views, because they were falling into, because they were so skeptical, the society, they'd given up on metaphysics and thinking about things. They said, all I'm worried about is myself right now. And he's credited with not only saving the Greek culture, but maybe saving even the Western world, to get people to think about things, and think about things such as virtue and big picture things. And then Plato came along and worked upon his, and came up with this theory of ideas in order to also unify the diversities. How do we explain this? And then Aristotle didn't like the way he did it, so he came up with this theory of substance. And so we see this throughout the history of mankind, these philosophical wheels turning, and each successive generation is seeking to save the phenomena of existence, to bring salvation in a sense. Now, would you concede that you're a part of that machine trying to do that?
I'm not sure that I describe it in that manner, but sure. Yeah, what I believe that I'm seeking is understanding. I do exist. I'm here, and regardless of what I do or don't do, I think that that's simply a fact. It's not something that I need to save from anything. I just try to understand what I've gotten or found myself in.
Right, and your understanding is, in a sense, salvation. In other words, you're trying to take all the diversity, these things in your life like this, and you're saying, how can I make them together? And I have a lot of my atheist friends that thinking of one person, I won't mention his name. He knows who he's probably watching right now. He thinks he's a lot smarter than he is. He has a degree in philosophy. He has no idea how to. He mocks the idea of unity and diversity, even though it's a very central aspect of our existence. And what we want to do is we want to take all this information and you want to understand it. You want coherence. You want to make sense out of reality. And in a sense, you're unifying all the diversities of not only of information, but material and everything else. I mean, that's what M theory is, basically. It's a theory for everything. You know, they're trying to come up with this theory to unify diversity. And although metaphysics is mocked right now, that's what everybody is still seeking for. And so it is my contention that we're in a sense on the same page, working in the same direction, but we have different ways of doing it, and our goals are different levels, I would say, for that.
Sure.
So
I mean, that all sounds pretty reasonable. I guess I'm not here to argue semantics in that regard. So, I mean, if that's how you'd like to refer to that, sure. That it sounds, yes, I'd like to understand existence as it is to the best of my ability. And I'd like to promote others or promote that practice because, frankly, I think that it's useful, it's helpful, and I value the truth personally. I think that it's. I would rather. I think it was Carl Sagan who said, "I'd rather live a discomforting truth than the most comforting lie." It's a paraphrase, not exact, but. I would rather, I value having beliefs that have the highest confidence ratio possible for me to know that they are true. Now, again, no sort of in the fallibilistic sense.
Right. No, I agree. I'm totally on page with you right there. I agree with that completely. And I think that's what we're all about. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the nuts and bolts of our conversation here. You have conceded then that you exist. You don't have any doubts about that. You know you're not an illusion. Now, since
even if I was an illusion, I mean, I would still be, right? That's one of the things. If this was a simulation that running on a computer, well, I still, as a consciousness, as this entity, I may not exist in the form that I think that I do necessarily, but it still is an existence that it would be undeniable. Or, I mean, it is undeniable. For me to say I do not exist is foolish. I mean, simply using I assumes it. We'd be begging the question. So yes, absolutely.
So by way of cogito ergo sum, you know, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. If there's an inquirer, there's got to be someone making that inquiry.
Right, exactly.
So we're on the same page.
I could deny all day that you exist, though. This could all be a hallucination.
That's true. And I don't care about that. All I need is an inquirer. Okay, so since the inquirer exists, is the inquirer, well, let's say are you self-existent?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I mean, I've heard the term used plenty of times. Self-existent sort of implies a series of things, right? Like existing necessarily, having existed eternally. I guess the short answer to that is no. I am the product of a sexual union of my parents and a long line of successful sexual union between ancestors leading up to me.
Okay, so how do you justify the existence of? Okay, so how do you justify the existence of contingent existence without denying the law of non-contradiction, which is really just causality? Maybe I might be jumping ahead too much there.
So you're saying existence as it is, going sort of back through the chain. Eventually, there would have had to have been sort of a first mover, right? The uncaused cause is the argument that we're getting to. Am I right on that?
Yeah.
Sure. That's that's one that I've addressed before. I actually have put together sort of a flow chart for it. It's on Inspiring Doubt. But the the general idea is I don't necessarily need to justify it. The flow chart always starts with something exists, right? This is an observation. Something exists. Well, how did it get here? And we've got a couple options. It has always existed, right? In some form or another. It doesn't necessarily have to exist exactly as it is today. It could be changing, fluctuating, whatever.
No, if it's self-existent, it can't change.
That's an assertion that I'm not.
Okay, go ahead and give me your other options. We'll talk about.
If something exists, it may have always existed in some form or another. That's one way. That is one potential answer to that. There's also it may have started to exist spontaneously. We don't know that that's impossible. We just don't observe that often. So that is potentially possible. It may have started to exist spontaneously. That is, I think, also another valid interpretation of the concept of self-existent. There's then, of course, something else gave rise to it. So there's the three initial options, but there's always another option as well. That's simply, I don't know. And I'm okay with settling on that in some of these situations. So in this case, what I do say, though, is anytime you're going to make the leap from from something exists, and then go instead from I don't know and go to, well, it's always existed or it started existing spontaneously, then you kind of have a justification for that, right? Why do you believe that? Why? Well, what evidence do we have for this position? And in some cases, you really don't have any evidence, but you can still make sort of an Occam's razor argument, right?
Yes, that indeed.
It's not really the simplest, but the one that requires the fewest underlying assumptions is the one that should be sort of provisionally accepted as true. So if you're going to rest upon that, then I would say that simply declaring the universe as something that has always existed in some form or another, it could be cyclical, we could be referring to a multiverse, so this universe is simply one branch of it. I don't know exactly, but we know that this universe exists. And again, no, I'm using it in the fallibilistic sense, but this is an observation. We can tell that this universe exists with the exact same certainty as we can tell everything else other than the fact that we exist, which we can know with absolute certainty. Or that we ourselves exist. So that would be a reasonable place to simply apply one of those. Say, well, then that one has either always existed or it spontaneously came into existence. That's sort of the idea behind the Big Bang, right? It spontaneously came into existence. There's also M theory, multiverse. There's a handful of other theories associated. I'm not a cosmologist. Biology is actually my area of study. But that is sort of an assumption, right? We'd have to say, well, that's an underlying assumption that either has always existed in some form or another, or it came into existence spontaneously. Well, there's other people who would like to posit a creator for those. Say, well, either we know that it came into existence, and then we argue that we know that things don't spontaneously come into existence, therefore something must have caused it, right? That's sort of the first cause or prime mover argument. But then to extrapolate from that as to what a prime mover would be, and not necessarily just another previous cycle of this universe, or I mean, there's potentially infinite explanations as to what a first mover could be, or the previous mover before this, in this cycle, and to sort of choose one and rest on it, it ends up being an unjustified conclusion. We have to eliminate that by Occam's razor and go to the most recent thing that we actually know exists, and that's where I'd have to stop. Now, I'm happy again settling on an I don't know for this one. I'd be curious to find out, but anybody who settles on more than that, on a sort of firm, solid foundation of there must be a God that created things, or the universe did spontaneously come into existence, or the universe has always come to existence, without having a solid amount of evidence, a real justification for that position, is just kind of maybe making a probabilistic argument, sometimes making an argument that it's completely out of ignorance. It makes them feel comfort in the lack of uncertainty. And I know uncertainty can be a scary thing, but sometimes we just need to recognize that that's where we have to stay.
Okay, well, great. Now, this is kind of enjoyable for me because you've made my argument for me. You know my three possibilities, and you've given them for me. So you've done some of the legwork for me. Now, let me demonstrate why some of those will not work. Let's start with self-creation. You're saying something can spontaneously create itself. Now,
not necessarily create itself. It just spontaneously come into existence, right? Whether it's, I mean, creating itself is one of those that I've had people nitpick on it before. I don't see a difference really between self-creation coming into existence and describing it as self-creation or entirely spontaneous. I think that it ends up being sort of a semantics issue at that point. But yes.
Okay, well, if something happened, all right, before I begin though, all right, so we've got the inquirer as the fundamental presupposition epistemologically, and you've granted that, right?
Right.
Okay, you as an inquirer exist. Secondly, my second presupposition is the law of non-contradiction or rational coherence, because if you cannot have coherent relationship between subject and predicate or propositions, then you have no inquiry as well. Will you grant that as well?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, good. All right, so and now with those two presuppositions, what you're saying when you say something spontaneously happens, let's just imagine there's a time when there were absolutely nothing. Now, we can't think of that because the very thought of nothing is something. But just for the sake of the thought experiment, imagine there were absolutely nothing. What would we have today? If there ever were a time when there were absolutely nothing.
If that didn't change, we would still have nothing.
How would it change when it's nothing?
The question wouldn't even be reasonable. There would be no we. We would not exist to have. So therefore, nothing would still be the case. But what I guess the corollary to that is, what is stopping something from happening?
If there's nothing, then how can it happen before it exists? What do you mean, what is stopping? There's nothing there. There's not even the idea of nothing.
Right. Well, I don't think that the idea of nothing, you said that if we have an idea of nothing, that's not even nothing. That's still, there's the idea of it. Well, right. that I think is sort of begging the question to some, I mean, I can say that I have the idea of Bigfoot. That doesn't make Bigfoot something. It's a concept, a construct that it ends up being sort of a linguistic thing. But
okay, we're talking about the concept of nothing and something, and nothing is not something. An idea is a something. I mean, we're not talking
right,
about,
but an idea now, an idea today is not something in the past.
Yeah, but it's not nothing either, right?
An idea of nothing, it can be a concept of what nothing is like, which is just simply a void, a null. It's I mean, we have I mean, is the number 0 that's what the concept represents. Like if you have no apples, do you have something? Is having no apples having some apples?
Yes, you are having the idea of no apples.
Well, yes, you're right that I'm having an idea. But when we're quantifying what we really mean by that, I mean, we're not talking about the now. We're talking about the past. So if I say my ancestor had no apples and was not even aware of the existence of apples, it was somebody that had never heard of apples, had no concept of apples, to the phenomenology of my ancestor, apples were a null.
Yeah, but
my awareness of apples now mean that my ancestors had apples?
Yeah, but you're making a mistake of Gonalo with Anselm. We're not talking about apples. We're not talking about islands. We're not talking about dollars. We're talking about being itself. So we're not talking about something just because we think of it exists, that it exists or not. We're not talking about things. We're talking about existence in and of itself. If there is no existence, then there is no existence. Do you agree with that?
Well, then your concept, or sorry, the question itself can't be answered. It can't be understood. To say if there is no existence, there is no existence, and ask me if I agree on it, that's not a coherent question even at
That's
that
right.
point.
So spontaneous creation is nonsense, right?
I completely disagree. I think that, well, I shouldn't say that I disagree that it's nonsense. I think that it's an unknown. It's something that we don't see happen.
It is. Remember, the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot be and not be at the same time in the same relationship. So we're postulating nothing, and then you're saying it is and it isn't at the same time that it created itself. It doesn't make sense.
I'm not saying, of course, that would not be the case. To create itself, yes. For something to create itself, it would have to existed prior to its own existence, right? That's right. Sort of the issue of self-creation. For something to simply exist, to begin to exist spontaneously without a cause,
out of nothing,
is something that we don't know to be impossible.
Okay, are you familiar with the principle of causality?
Sure. Causality is inferred. It's something that we don't even know that.
No, it's a tautology. It's true by definition. It's every cause must, or every effect must have a cause, is definitional. Therefore, it's axiomatically true. By definition, it's analytically true. It's like saying a bachelor is an unmarried man. We're just repeating ourselves. The only way you can define an effect is to say it's a result of a cause. And the only way you can talk about a cause is that which gives rise to an effect. So to say that something is an effect without a cause is nonsense, because you're violating the principle that you're trying to...
well, sure, but then we're binding ourselves by language here to say that we don't have terminology to refer to something that simply arose spontaneously without a cause. Doesn't mean that it's impossible.
Remember, we're talking about the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot, that causality is
that doesn't defy the law of non-contradiction, though.
Sure it does. Causality is just an application of the law of non-contradiction. If you want to say an effect happens without a cause, then you're saying something must be and not be at the same time in the same relationship.
But you're begging the question by saying it's an effect. That's by saying an effect happens without a cause.
Effect is that which happens.
An effect is that which is caused, right?
No, an effect is that which happens. Do you agree with that?
Well, then that which happens, I'm perfectly happy defining that which happens as effect, but then an effect does not necessarily require a cause. We can't have the definition.
So an effect happens by definition, right? You agree with that?
Sure.
Okay. So an effect happens by definition, and if it happens without a cause, then it has to happen itself before it is. That's the whole point. Causality is analytic in nature. It's not a synthetic argument. It's analytic by nature.
We've never actually observed any causality, first of all. Causality is inferred. We believe it to be the case. Because things appear to be caused by other things. That things could simply do what they do at all moments and have the illusion of being caused. We can't sort of
that's the thing that you
so.
Okay, we cannot prove causal relationship, as Hume stated, but we cannot say that there's no such thing as a causal relationship. That's what Hume wasn't denying causality. He was denying our knowledge of causal relationships necessarily. But the idea of causality is analytic. It's a law of non-contradiction, and that's my fundamental premise in this inquiry.
Well, let's see where this heads. Let's provisionally grant it for the moment and move forward.
Okay. All right. So I made the statement, and we'll provisionally grant that something cannot create itself before it says, or you said spontaneously create itself. All right. The other option is for self-existence. The universe could be self-existent. Now, the problem with that is that that which is self-existent is not dependent for its existence. And what it is, and to use Aristotelian terminology, is its pure actuality. It doesn't have any potentiality. It doesn't happen, because if something happens, then it's dependent upon that which is bringing the change upon it, and therefore it's contingent by definition. So if I get sunburned, then the sun is acting upon me. I'm contingent to the sun for that effect upon me. So if you want
but if the sun is part of you, are you still contingent?
Okay. All right, if you want to say something is without differentiation, is something is actuality and potentiality in the ultimate sense, you're violating the law of identity, because something that happens is something that is contingent by definition. Something that is self-existent does not happen by definition. So you can't say that it's both things at the same time unless you're going to differentiate between creature and
When I look at
creator.
this argument, it seems like just a bunch of sophistry. I hate to be dismissive in this regard, but when we say that something is an effect, something happens, that which happens, and that self-existent means that things can't happen. That's simply a bald assertion. We
No, it's not.
don't know. Self-existent is a concept. It's something that we can. It's a tautology if we define it as such. But that doesn't mean that it's applicable to a actual. It has a referent.
Okay, please define it otherwise than it being tautological. Give me another definition.
Why? I'm sorry. Oh, give me
another
a different
definition
for
self-existent. That's not what I'm saying.
I see. Self-existent is one of those terms that kind of it's begs itself in a way because it uses the term self, right? Self-existent.
Because that's what words mean.
Imply that when we say that something is self-existent, that almost it carries with it a baggage of entity, of consciousness with it. It is existence in and of its self. But I'd like to divorce it from first of all any sort of conscious connotation, any sort of causality, but any sort of intentionality in that regard. It exists. It's something that is self-existent would be something that I really think that it's a valid interpretation of the term to simply say it has always existed in some form or another, and it's also a valid interpretation to say it spontaneously arose.
That's a different option.
I don't think it is. I think that both are equally described as self-existent.
No, they're not.
Well, because
one is self-created, one is self-existent. I mean, it's not that hard. I mean, really.
No,
you're equivocating it.
Well, I think that you're trying to pin me into some terms that are very useful to theology, but they're not really useful to reality.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at the terms and saying, okay, well, self-existent to me means it exists without a cause, right? That's what self-existent means.
It's not dependent for its existence.
Right, and that's fine. It's not. I'm happy with that. It's not dependent on any other thing.
Therefore, it can't change in form, because if it would change, it is dependent upon that which brings the change. Do you agree with that?
Why would it be dependent upon that which brings any change? If it is self-existent, why can it not inherently have the ability to change?
Because then it would be contingent on something outside of itself.
That's why. I mean, this is simply an assertion that it's contingent upon something outside of itself. If it exists, who is to say that it must exist in a static form? That something exists, and that thing can do things. Interact, right? Why must it have a cause? Maybe the nature of it itself is what is causing it. It existed in this form, and it is traveling towards a final form, or it is cyclical in nature. That the form. See, this is where we go into this realm of the unknown, and then you want to talk about what's known within this realm, and there's not things that are known about this completely esoteric idea of self-existent. It's you're looking through the lens of a classical philosopher, and I think that it's really not very applicable to anything. Sorry?
It's not very easy to defeat, is it?
No, it's not relevant. I mean, I don't need to defeat it because it's nothing but my concept of self-existence is this. Great. I think that's an invalid concept. That's me defeating it.
Okay, then show me where it's. Which give me another. I've already asked you this. Give me another concept of self-existence that makes more sense.
I did. I said self-existence simply means that which exists without a cause.
Okay. Therefore, if it were to change, then it would be subject to that which brings the change, right?
No.
Okay, how does something change when something's not interacting with it?
How is change how is it not possible for change to be something that also exists within or inherently within that which exists, a property of the existence that is
Because
self-existence?
being and becoming are mutually exclusive properties. Do you
Okay,
agree
well
with
then,
that?
and let's grant that provisionally as well here and explore what that means if we say that this self-existence entity must be a god, right? How can something that is incapable of changing act?
Well, what you're applying to it then is you're saying that which is self-existent cannot be volitional. Would that be correct?
I think so. Sorry, I'm not a classically trained philosopher. As I said before, my education in philosophy is all from reading books, discussing things online, reading articles and things. So I don't have as much of the terminology. My friend Ozymandias is great at this side of it, but
Yeah, he won't debate me.
no.
Oh, no, he refuses. He says I'm too rude. Um, so if something happens,
Right. So if we grant that your argument of
right.
self-existence, that a self-existent thing cannot change, well, how then can it act? How can it do anything?
Oh, okay. So what we've got is we've got the realm of happening, and then we've got the realm of being. Those are two exclusive realms that must exist for this, because we've got that which self-existence dwells in, and then we've got that which happens. And what we have is we are living in a time-space continuum. Do you agree with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have an idea from your perspective what time is?
More or less. I mean, I have a concept of it, but yes.
Okay, let me give you my perspective and see if you agree with it. From my perspective, time is nothing more than matter, contingent matter relating to motion. Every time we observe time, we're watching stuff move, interact with each other, whether it be a sand clock or hands on a movement, or just watch the sun go down and move by us. Time is matter relating to motion. Do you agree with that?
It doesn't seem quite right, but
I've not had anybody. I've not had
I'm
anybody
not really here
question
into
it.
I'm not really into semantics arguments. I'm glad to sort of provisionally grant things as long as we can go back and revisit.
Okay,
If
well,
it
let
becomes
me just say show where I'm going. It's nothing really trick or anything.
Yeah.
So all that we know about time is our contingent observance of contingent matter relating to motion or in movement. So what we have to do is say, well, what is time outside of contingency? We're going to say, I don't know. I don't know. And and this is Alex, so you might want to watch. I don't know if you watch the discussion I had with Alex Botten. This is B2. He says, if something happens, God must happen. My assertion is that for God to interact with contingency, he must use the type of language that we can understand, which would be phenomenological language or language of analogy. And language of analogy is the terms change in relation to the beings that are being described. And the example that I use is R.C. Sproul. I got all this from R.C. Sproul. Is that a dog? When you speak about your dog, you say, my dog Dixie is a good dog because she doesn't bite the mailman and she doesn't pee in the house. But when I talk about my neighbor Joe, when I say that he's good, I'm not saying that he doesn't bite the mailman or wet the house. So the meaning of the term changes in relation to the beings that are being described. And so the same thing must happen with us when we're relating to God. He must relate to us analogically, because he cannot, self-existence is an incommunicable attribute. In other words, it cannot be communicated because it's pure being. Once you share it, the sharing itself is becoming. So it's not possible for him to share that attribute with us because we happen. So what he's got to do is he's got to anthropomorphize and speak to us in language of change for us to understand. Otherwise, there'd be no point of contact.
But you're saying he has to, and he has to do this. Yeah. Once this happens, I mean, this language implies it hasn't always been the case, right? This is something that God has not always done. God has done at some point. And if God never changes, if existence itself, if being itself cannot change, then it is impossible for any change to ever happen in any regard. As a matter of fact, it is a incoherent concept for for something self-existent to be the cause of anything else. It can't be, in your definition of self-existent, I should say.
Well, I am not saying that he undergoes change in the creative act, but I am saying that there is a change that is affected, and that is the creation, and it must be ex nihilo. Otherwise, that which is another one of my friends, my atheist friends, he says, God can't create ex nihilo, because if he creates ex nihilo, then the causality means you need to respond with some kind of material cause. But the point is that if that material which God supposedly interacts with in order to create is eternal, then by definition, it is self-existent as well. But you can't have two self-existence, because self-existence cannot act upon each other, because it's got to be contingent. One has to be contingent to the other, and it doesn't make any sense.
But also, if the self-existent thing cannot change, it cannot then create something that is contingent, because that act would be something that it's not always doing. It would have to begin to do that.
No,
to begin to create.
Yes, from our perspective, we've got to understand everything watching contingent matter relating to motion. So yes, from our perspective, it's got to look like that, but it can't be.
Then you're looking at this from our perspective. Then causality is an issue, but from the perspective of being, causality is not an issue. A creator could cause something, right? That's not. Then the temporal.
I'm saying that I am saying that the cause is necessary, but the effect is not necessary by definition. You can have a cause without an effect, but you can't have an effect without a cause. And we both agree that the effect, you and I, exists, or you, if you want to be a solipsist, you exist. Therefore, the cause must exist. So the necessary component is not you.
Sure, I agree that there's a cause for us. I don't agree in a teleological sense that there's a cause that intentionally created humans, that we are a goal of anything.
Yeah, but you already conceded that you're teleological yourself.
In what respect?
You're trying to save the phenomena of existence.
That's
your whole life is centered around getting answers, right?
Well, I have goals.
Yeah.
That I would like to understand things. Yeah, that's not incompatible with my consciousness as something that is an emergent characteristic of my brain, is capable of having desires and goals and a deep concept, or a concept of deep time, but that doesn't require a teleological desire for my consciousness to have existed in the first place. That's
sure it does. You just violated the law of identity there. You just said that non-consciousness is consciousness, or unintentionality.
You're giving consciousness a special sort of criteria. Consciousness is an emergent phenomenon of nature. It is nothing special. It's just something that happens.
Okay, let's not use conscious. I want to use, let's say, intentionality.
Well, intentionality is an aspect of consciousness.
Okay, so you're saying that that intentionality was accidentally created by unintentionality.
Well, accidentally is, I guess, even that implies a degree of teleology, doesn't it? That if something is an accident, it would have to be unintended in such a way that.
So unintentionality intended to create intentionality before it intended it.
No, that's what I mean by saying an accident. It implies that there would have to be some teleology. No, it happened. It is an observation of what occurred without needing to say that it was an accident, because an accident would mean that it was sort of an oops. Something was there that had different plans, and then this happened and was like, oh well, that's not what I expected, right? So I can have accidents. Things can happen accidentally for me. Things can't happen accidentally for a rock. Rocks can't. that things happen to rocks and with rocks, and rocks even happen to things, but they're not accidents. Accidents is a concept that requires a consciousness. So,
okay, but teleology, I mean, you do agree that you are postulating unintentioned intentionality. Do you agree with that?
yeah, sure.
Okay, so at one point in time, you have unintentionality, and then that, which is its opposite, and at some point in time, it had to be both what it is and what it is not at the same time in the same relationship, and it violates the law of identity. And
I
you're saying it
think that you're
arose.
misapplying the law of identity in this regard.
Well, identity just says something is what it is, and it's not its opposite.
But the law of identity, it's a useful concept in discussing concepts, oddly enough. But it's when you're discussing it in this regard, for something to be unintentionality had to be both unintentionality and intentionality at the same time. Well, no, I mean, it could have been unintentional a moment before, and it could have arose gradually.
That doesn't matter. It's still, it's at some point you had to have both of those at the same time.
Sure, and right now we do have both at the same time, don't we? I mean, rocks are unintentional. Humans are intentional. There is unintentionality,
but they're in
and
different relationships. So I'm saying at the same time, the same relationship. I'm talking about in
why?
Greg Brahe.
Why would this have to have been at the same time? I mean,
That's what you're saying.
It certainly was this case, right? Greg Brahe was not always intentional. I was at one point a zygote. I was a fertilized egg and from sperm, right? At that point, I had no consciousness.
But humans are intentional type creatures, or are they not by definition?
Well, I mean, I could introduce you to several humans that are not. There's anencephalic humans that are not.
There's something wrong with them, though, right?
Sure, yeah. That it is a characteristic of humanity, yes, of our
so humans
biology.
are intentional beings, are they not?
Yes. Humans, as they exist today, are intentional beings, generally speaking. I mean, again, there's exceptions to and some humans that aren't, but yes, and of course, that's not at every stage throughout our lives, right? Intentionality is a trait of our lives that arises as we develop, right. And that's my argument for intentionality in nature as well. I mean, for it to be a coherent concept, that intentionality arose in me as something that did not exist before, and as I reached an age that my brain was developed enough to be intentional. The same holds true through a gradualistic evolution of a brain.
That's right.
It's perfectly coherent for unintentionality.
No, it's perfectly incoherent. It's violating.
But you agree that it's coherent that I started out as an unintentional being and became what I am today, right?
No, I've never said that. I said humans are always intentional beings, and you conceded that.
No, that's
unless there's something
when you say humans are always intentional beings, you're speaking of it in a category. Then humans as a class,
right,
are defined as or generally have the characteristic of intentionality, because we have this concept of humans as sort of adult humans, or even infants, children, that act with intention, right? Mm-hmm. But humans clearly are not always intentional beings. No, we start life as a fertilized egg. It is a single cell that we become that gives rise to it, and it develops, and it takes several months even before we have anything that could even begin to resemble intentionality. So no, we are not necessarily, we are not perpetually I'm not intentional beings.
Yes, but I'm not saying that we are intentional at every stage of our existence. I'm saying human beings are intentional beings by definition. That's what we are.
That's well, if you're going to say by definition, that is an observation. It is a taxonomical definition.
That's right.
We are classifying humans. That's humans, right, by what we have
I'm
observed
not saying it's analytic
today. Right.
I'm just saying that we have a class.
There's therefore no contradiction if we say that we humans, that this class that exists today as it does, it has intentionality, and therefore that is something that we would say is a characteristic of humanity. Right. Okay. Rocks do not have intentionality. That is a right, characteristic of rocks. That's right. Right. Now, if we were to discover a rock that had intentionality, does that mean that it's no longer a rock, or that I guess
There'd have to be some kind of taxonomical modification there, but all I'm saying is that intentionality exists. It doesn't really matter if it's us or anything else. All I need is one modicum of intentionality, and the point is proved that there must be self-existent intentionality, because contingent intentionality doesn't intend itself before it exists.
But why would it need to intend itself? Why would it need to be intended at all, and not simply be an accidental or unintended emergent characteristic of the interaction of matter?
Because at some point in time, it would have to be both what it is and its exact opposite at the same time.
That's because you're applying a strict taxonomy to it, and looking at it as though you have an analytical definition when it is in fact simply a classification. So no, that's I mean, there's a time when it's difficult to do it. This is the fallacy of the heap. I mean, if I give you a heap of gold, right, and I take away a single piece, and I say, well, is this still a heap of gold? And eventually, I'm going to get to a point where I say, or you'll say, this is no longer a heap of gold, right? And I'll say, well, no, it's still a heap of gold. Look, there's still it's a smaller heap, yes, but it's a heap. And eventually we're going to get down to a single piece of gold. At some point in there, it ceased to be reasonably called a heap. But our inability to define exactly when this happened doesn't mean that there's not a transition, and that transitions can't be gradual.
Okay, but we're talking about gold and no gold. It's not a heap or how big it is. It's gold or no gold. Listen, Greg, I've got to go. I've got to put my daughter's alternator on tonight. I have to keep this to an hour. We just had kind of an.
What kind of car is it? A foreign car?
No, it's a 95 Honda. I took it out. I put one in 3 months ago and it went out. And this weekend I went to get another one, didn't have one. And so I had to go and pick it up the next day, and I didn't have time to put it in, and so she has no car, and so I'd like to get it done tonight so she can drive.
I understand. So, well, this has been a pleasure. I guess I feel like we're sort of leaving this hanging, that there's more that needs.
Sure. No, we can do it again. I enjoy it. You're a fun interlocutor. I enjoy it.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well. Yeah, I guess what I was getting at it is that, you know, I think that this really sort of fundamentally comes back to the argument itself, right? We're all sort of making an argument from ignorance, saying we don't really understand how this could happen.
No, we're making an analytical argument.
It can't happen, and I think that we're misapplying the. I'm sorry, I'm not able to.
The only word that's misapplying is the guy on the other side of the screen there. It's not me.
Well, don't we all feel that way, right? So, I mean, in the long run, I feel that I guess my position remains unchanged. I hope that people that watched had some entertainment, if nothing else. Hopefully more, they got some insight or appreciated at least a differing perspective, and maybe got some inspiration to look into things a little bit more. I look forward to doing this again with you. And again, I'm going to plug my stuff. Anybody out there, it's www.inspiringdoubt.com. It brings you right to my Facebook page. I'm also Greg Brahe on Facebook. It's I forgot to put up my lower third here, but it's Brahe, spelled like the astronomer Tycho Brahe, who actually not quite a direct line ancestor, but from the same family. So it's cool. I'm related to every living Brahe on the planet now, because it was an open name, so we have found. So if you're a Brahe, find me, or if you're not, find me on Facebook.
And I'd like to put a plug for my my website is herpityderp.com, and go and look me up and laugh. Anyway, thanks, Greg, for the opportunity, and we'll get together and we'll continue this conversation.
All right, thank you. Have a great day. Or great night. Good luck with the alternator.
Thank you. Bye.